Hello, my name is Grant Scott and I'm the author of Professional Photography, The New Global Landscape Explained, published by Focal Press. Welcome to our podcast in which we talk to a photographer based in London called Niall McDiarmid. Niall has been working on a particularly impressive personal project entitled Crossing Paths for the last few years. We're going to talk to Niall about that project, about his inspiration for that project, how he's continued it through, and what his hopes are for the project as it comes to fruition. So, Niall, thanks very much for joining us on this podcast.
Oh, that's great. Great to be with you, Grant.
So, as I was just saying, the Crossing Paths project is something which you've been particularly engaged with alongside your professional photographic practice. Can you maybe just give us a brief idea as to what it is, how it came about, and how long you've been working on the project?
The project really started about January 2011. It sort of came about by chance. I had been working on some sort of personal projects in and around the London area, and mostly based on portraits of local people I'd met and that sort of thing. They were a little bit ambling and not really going anywhere. But it was a quiet Sunday, middle of January, and I just decided, well, I'd go out with a camera and go for a walk. But I ended up going in the completely opposite direction, ended up crossing South London, took a few portraits on the way. And when I got back, I was pretty happy with them. So I started to do some more walks across London, different areas, stopping at different places, catching a train, catching a bus, taking some portraits. And before you know it, I'd built up quite a number of these portraits that I was happy with. And basically it developed from there. Firstly across London, but then as the spring came around 2011, I thought, well, I'm interested in branching out from London. I didn't want to be seen as some sort of fashion-based thing or that sort of thing, or London-based thing. And really, I started going to some more of the commuter towns around London, smaller places that maybe you wouldn't think of as people would go to take photographs, like Crawley and Guildford and Woking and St Albans, places like that. And then in spring 2011, I was visiting the northeast of England, and I started to travel up and down the northeast coast there. And then I just sort of had this sort of crazy idea that I would just go to basically every town in the UK. And since then, I've traveled across the whole of the UK.
So it's really a project that came from a micro environment and has gradually grown through the burbs and then out through the country. But one of the points which I focus on in the book is very much how the personal project has become a very important element within the professional photographer's practice as a way of exploring creativity and also building a body of work. Is that something that you've noticed as you've worked through the Crossing Paths project?
Yes, I think so. When I started it, and I think a lot of photographers like myself, when you're doing personal projects, maybe there's a feeling that they will dovetail a little bit with your commercial work or editorial work or whatever you would call it, and maybe that would help that work. But funnily enough, as the project's developed, it's become a little bit the opposite. This is work that I don't do anymore because it's because it's anything to do with my commercial work. It's because I want to do these pictures, and it's because I want to document these people and meet these people. So really, it's a bit more, and it's really got nothing to do with the commercial work, and it's just a project, really. Well, it's really just me being a photographer, really, in the end of the day, and it's really nothing to do with my commercial work, as it's turned out.
But presumably, although it doesn't have a direct relationship then with your commercial work, it's very much about you and building your personality as a photographer.
Well, definitely. I think when we all start as photographers, we have this idea of, it's slightly idealistic that I'll be able to go to a certain place or go to do a certain thing, and I'll just be able to walk in there and say I'm a photographer and take pictures, and everyone will be fine. But and you can do that for years, but as the years go by, you become slightly restricted because people commission you and say, "Oh, can you go to Birmingham and take a portrait of this?" And although it sounds great at the beginning to go to Birmingham and say, "Oh, I'm a photographer, I'm in Birmingham," but really they're only there on behalf of another organization. So having that confidence and that ability to just walk to a town and stop and speak to somebody and take their picture, and they say, "Well, why are you doing this?" And you say, "Well, it's because I'm a photographer and that's what I want to do." You don't have to explain yourself. And it takes a certain confidence, and it's only something that comes out, after a few years of experience. So that's what's been the great thing for me. Maybe I'd lost a little bit of that passion for being a photographer. I have been a photographer for 20 years, and really now I just love that ability to, as I say, just go somewhere and say, "Well, I'm a photographer and I'm taking pictures," and sometimes you can say it's part of a project. In other ways, it's just being that, having that confidence to say, "Well, I'm just a photographer. It's not for any particular purpose," and so that's what's been great for me.
So, at what point in the project did you start to think this might actually have some kind of an end goal? It might become something, whether it would become, I know you post the images as almost like an online blogging situation, but that it could be an exhibition or it could be a book of some kind or some form of publication. How far into the story were you?
Well, I suppose after a couple of months, I realized that, there was a certain amount of interest from certain people. But as I say, I've been a photographer for 20 years and, I've been successful and had, worked for magazines and book publishers and had stuff in galleries and that sort of thing. But I think for me, there's I have a lot of friends who are not in media or not photographers. And, although they were interested in what I did or, had an interest in the magazines I was working for, I think really this project really sparked off an interest in my friends and my family. My family are not media people. They don't really know much about this sort of, what I do in my work. So I really realized after a few months that people outside the photography industry, friends, people who don't really take an interest in my work, suddenly started to pick up on me and say, "Oh yeah, I saw what you're doing." And really that's been one of the real joys for me, is that, it has really reached out to people outside the photography industry. I think there is quite a tendency with people with their projects and, they get some recognition, but it can be only for people who are, in the photography industry, and to be able to reach out to that other people has been a real joy for me.
Well, I think that's one of the basic premises I have when talking about and defining this concept of the new landscape, is that professional photography has to understand that photography has now become a very democratic form of communication, and you seem to be bringing that democracy in the way in which you work and an open-mindedness.
Yeah, I'm very interested in, developing some sort of relationship, whether it's online or not, with people either are photographed or people who are interested in supporting the project. I mean, it does give me a huge amount of joy when I put pictures up and I have interaction with people, either people I've photographed or people I've met, or people I've met online, who say, "Oh, I saw that photograph. I remember I've been to that town," or "I like that image, I like that work," or I saw you were in that certain town a while ago. And you can sort of build a certain momentum with a group of people. And as looking forward for the project, I mean, one of the things I'm very interested in doing is that people have supported the project would be to say, "Well, thank you for supporting them. Here's something, whether it's a book or an exhibition that you can get involved with, or something you can take away with to remember, this period, these 2 years where these pictures were produced." So I think that snowballing effect and drawing people in has been great for me.
Well, it's really interesting because there are a number of themes that obviously I draw on through the book, but which have also been mirrored in these podcast conversations. One is obviously the word of passion for photography, but the other key word seems to be community, and this idea of building communities, new communities, perhaps outside of the traditional photographic community, and drawing in people into a wider, broader community that perhaps previously wouldn't have engaged with professional photography.
Yes, I think so. I mean, one of the other things I would say is that, there are a lot of people who, who go online and maybe don't use social networks but still follow, and they're quieter people, and it can be quite interesting when you start getting out there and talking to people who are not, in the photography industry. And they do say, "Oh, I've seen your work." They may not have sent you a message or sent you an email or sent you something on Twitter, but it is great when you do meet people and you know that they have been following your work, and they can talk about it, and you're reaching out to them slowly. You don't have to have people writing back to you saying, "Oh, I saw your work," or on Twitter or Facebook or whatever. So if you can slowly build and generally reach out to people, and also try and keep a steady course where you build over a period of time, you can hopefully in my case, build a certain audience.
Yeah, it's also interesting. I think you've worked in the industry for 20 odd years. I think I'm reaching my 30th year now. And in the past, that kind of project, this kind of project that you're working on, was perceived, and I think perhaps still is perceived by some professional photographers, incorrectly, I would say, as working for free, in the idea that if you're going to take pictures, you have to be paid for it. But obviously that's something that doesn't occur to you.
Not at all, no. I mean, I'm a photographer, if I get paid or not. I just want to take pictures, hopefully good pictures. I have a passion for photography. So if I had to work in the supermarket and take pictures at the weekend, that's fine by me. The great thing about not getting paid for this, as you say, is that, I don't have any ties to any organizations. I haven't been given a grant. I feel, this is my project. I think if you do get funded by a certain organization or whatever, then you have, a certain responsibility to them. And thankfully I don't have that. And that's been a good thing for me, because it's allowed me to do the pictures when I want. I don't feel like I have to produce anything. I could stop tomorrow. Not that I've got any desire to, stop being a photographer, but I don't have those ties. And I can earn money other ways. We all can, whatever we have to do.
I think it's interesting when I look at your work. It always reminds me, and I hope this isn't an inappropriate thing to say, but it does remind me of the work of August Sander with that documentation that he did at the beginning of the last century of trades.
Yeah, I do. I see that. I haven't really studied his work that well, to be honest. I have studied other people, but a few have mentioned that, yes.
And I think that's very interesting to me, in that I'm talking about a new landscape, which a lot of the online, the technological developments have allowed us to do. But actually, there is still also a purity of thought that remains true through the history of photography. So actually, in a lot of ways, we are informed by the past, but using the tools of the present.
Yeah, I would say so. I think the great thing about is now that there's a few different avenues you can take. The one thing you probably, although we all tend to use the same networks or the same things, or those who find their own path or do their own thing are usually the ones who do the best. I would say you can learn from people in the past, but you just take those ideas and then find your own path. People always ask me, when you meet somebody, what do you say to them to ask them to take your photograph? And I say, well, I can't actually remember. So I often think they're looking for some advice to take pictures themselves of similar. So I always say, I tell you what, you come up with your own thing you'll say to these people. You say what you want, because that's going to work best. Don't take any advice from me.
Well, again, you're echoing something in the book and something that reoccurs, which is that there are no rules. Currently, it's very much a question of being open-minded and building your own kind of path and your own vision that works for you, but don't be closed-minded to the possibilities that are out there.
Well, definitely. Going back to your August Sander thing, I think it is always worth looking at people who you would perceive to be very successful and maybe some time back, and saying, okay, they did this. Say, okay, they did that, and to take maybe the foundations of what they have done, those photographers have done, or not necessarily photographers, other people in the creative field, and try and learn from them and find your own path using those. It's a good start, I would say.
One of the elements I talk about in the book about your particular project is the simplicity of the idea, and quite often I think when photographers are looking for a personal project, they overcomplicate both the process of trying to find their stories and the story itself, whereas yours is an incredibly simple concept.
Yeah, well, as I say, I've been a photographer for quite a few years, and I have worked on a few sort of projects myself where I've tried to do stuff and reach out to audience, and they've failed. And I'm quite a collector of books and that, and I have seen projects that have succeeded, and some of them that are very complicated have succeeded very well. There was a few projects I've liked that have worked like that. There was a guy called Christian Patterson who did quite a complicated project called Red-Headed Peckerwood. It was a couple of years ago, and there was Christine Medell, I think she's called. They did a thing called Afronauts, which was a very successful project as well. But I realized that it wasn't for me. I couldn't do complicated projects, and I started to look at photographers maybe who were successful, and everybody from David Bailey, who he just seems to do just very straightforward lighting, through to people like Martin Parr, who had a signature look which is very straightforward. And I thought, well, maybe I should just do something straightforward when my project started to run, and it worked for me. But again, it goes back to what we're saying; it's not going to work for everybody, and when you do projects, you're going to have some defeats. You may have a lot of defeats, but somewhere down the line, if you push hard enough, you can pay for your success with all your defeats. Is my theory.
Well, that sounds like a very good place to end. Neil, if people want to look at your work, where can they find it?
Just go to Google and put in Crossing Paths. It's at the top of the list. Simple as that. I think when you're doing a project, that's one thing I would say. A name is not really important. In fact, I'm not a great believer in projects full stop. Just being a photographer is pretty much a project. But it's quite important to have something people can find, or something simple, or, a name that's very straightforward. So you can just type it in and find it. So that's where you can find it.
And can people follow you on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter. I love Facebook. Just shout me up. I do like to interact with people. I travel a lot around the country. I'm in different towns. It's great to stop and say hello to new people.
That's great. And obviously, I talk about your work, and I talk about the Crossing Paths project and your inspirations, and there are examples of your work in the book. Neil, thank you very much indeed for your time, your passion, and good luck with everything you're working on.
Thanks, Grant.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.